The sound of a shattering whiskey bottle echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, as Virginia Taylor's world collapsed around her. It was 1878, and at 21 years old, she never imagined her own flesh and blood would trade her away like cattle at an auction. 2 bottles of whiskey, Hank Taylor slurred, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the half-empty bottle in his hand. That's all you're worth, Ginny. Virginia stood frozen in the doorway of their family's run-down cabin, her slender fingers clutching the worn fabric of her blue cotton dress. Her brother's gambling debts had finally caught up to them, and in his desperation, he'd found the most despicable solution. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "I'm not your property, Hank." Her brother's laughter was harsh as he took another long swig from his bottle. "Pa left me in charge, and what I say goes. Pack your things. Jasper Collins will be here at sundown." Virginia had heard stories about Jasper Collins, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous 2 wives, both now buried on his property under suspicious circumstances. The thought of being handed over to such a man made her stomach turn. "I'd rather die," she said, straightening her back with newfound resolve. Hank's expression darkened as he rose from his chair, whiskey sloshing over the rim of his bottle. "Don't be dramatic. You'll do as you're told." Virginia retreated to her small bedroom, mind racing as she contemplated her options. Running away seemed the only choice, but where would she go? With no money and no relatives willing to take her in, her prospects were bleak. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cabin floor, Virginia stuffed a few belongings into a small bag, a photograph of her parents, a hairbrush, and the book of poetry her mother had given her before succumbing to fever 3 years ago. She would flee at the first opportunity, even if it meant facing the harsh wilderness alone. The sound of approaching horses stopped her cold. Sundown had come faster than expected. With trembling hands, she tucked the bag under her bed and smoothed her dress. Perhaps she could reason with Collins, appeal to whatever shred of humanity might exist within him. Heavy boots stomped onto the porch, followed by a sharp knock. Virginia held her breath as Hank flung open the door, his greeting dying on his lips when he saw not 1 man, but 2. "Afternoon, Taylor," said a deep voice Virginia didn't recognize. "Heard you were conducting some business today." Virginia crept closer to her partially open door, peering through the crack. Next to Jasper Collins, a stout, balding man with a perpetual scowl, stood a tall stranger. His broad shoulders and strong jawline were visible even from her limited vantage point. A black Stetson hat sat atop his head, and his eyes, blue as the Arizona sky, scanned the cabin with calculated interest. "What's this about, Collins?" Hank asked, suspicion lacing his words. "And who's he?" Jasper Collins spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt floor. "This here's Blake Nathaniel. Owns the Double Circle Ranch south of here. Says he's got business with you." Virginia watched as the stranger Blake removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He couldn't have been more than 28, with a face weathered by sun, but handsome nonetheless. "I understand you're looking to make a trade," Blake said, his voice carrying an authority that made even Hank straighten slightly. Her brother narrowed his eyes. "What's it to you?" Blake's hand moved to the gun belt slung low on his hips, not as a threat, but a casual reminder of its presence. "I'm making you a better offer." Virginia's heart hammered against her ribs. Was this man proposing to buy her as well? She felt sick at the thought of being bartered over like livestock, regardless of who the buyer might be. Collins stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now wait just a minute. We had a deal, Taylor. 2 bottles of my best whiskey for your sister." Blake's laugh was humorless. 2 bottles? That's what you value a woman's life at, Collins. Jasper's hand twitched toward his own weapon. "Stay out of this, Nathaniel. This ain't your concern." "I'm making it my concern," Blake replied calmly. He turned to Hank. 4 bottles of whiskey. Finest Kentucky bourbon money can buy. Virginia couldn't believe what she was hearing. This stranger was offering to pay double, just to what? Own her instead? She felt bile rising in her throat. Hank's eyes gleamed with greed. "For bottles, you say? And $20 cash," Blake added, producing a small pouch that clinked with coins. Collins sputtered in outrage. "This is ridiculous. We had an agreement." "Business is business, Jasper," Hank replied with a shrug. Man's offering a better price. Virginia could contain herself no longer. She pushed her door open and stepped into the main room, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. Do I get any say in this? She demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. All three men turned to look at her. Collins with disdain, Hank with irritation, but Blake Nathaniel's expression was different, contemplative, almost respectful. Miss Taylor, Blake said, tipping his hat slightly. I apologize for discussing you as though you weren't present. Virginia was taken aback by the unexpected courtesy. You're apologizing for your manners while trying to buy me like a sack of flour? A hint of a smile touched Blake's lips. I'm not trying to buy you, madam. I'm trying to save you. Collins stepped between them, his breath reeking of tobacco and whiskey. She's promised to me, Nathaniel. Back off. Blake's hand moved to his holster again, this time with clear intent. I suggest you take your leave, Collins. Unless you'd prefer to discuss this further outside. Something in Blake's tone, a deadly certainty, made Collins falter. He glared at Hank. You'll regret crossing me, Taylor. Both of you will. With that, he stomped out, slamming the door behind him. Virginia stood frozen, uncertain what this new development meant for her future. Was trading one master for another really salvation? 4 bottles and $20, Blake said to Hank, his eyes never leaving Virginia's face. Do we have a deal? Hank nodded eagerly. Deal? Blake reached into his saddlebag and produced the whiskey and money, which Hank snatched greedily. Then Blake turned to Virginia, his expression softening. Miss Taylor, I know this is unusual, but I'd like to make you an offer of marriage. Virginia blinked in shock. Marriage? You don't even know me. I know enough, Blake replied. I know you deserve better than to be traded for whiskey. I know Collins would have made your life a living hell. And I know that as my wife, you'll have protection, respect, and freedom. Freedom? Virginia repeated skeptically. As your wife. Blake nodded. You'll have your own room at my ranch. Your own space. I won't demand anything of you except to help with the household duties. If, after a reasonable time, you wish to dissolve our marriage, I'll ensure you have the means to make your own way. Virginia searched his face for any sign of deception, but found only sincerity. Still, caution prevailed. Why would you do this for a stranger? Something flashed in Blake's eyes, a shadow of old pain. Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people have no options. I have the means to help. That's reason enough. Virginia glanced at her brother, who was already opening one of the bottles. He wouldn't protect her from Collins for long, especially once the whiskey ran out. And running away alone would be dangerous, possibly fatal. If I agree, she said slowly, I want your word that this is a business arrangement. Nothing more. Blake nodded. You have it. Though I suggest we keep the nature of our arrangement private. A marriage of convenience won't offer you the same protection as a real one in the eyes of others. Virginia took a deep breath, weighing her limited options. When would this marriage take place? Today, Blake answered. Judge Wilson owes me a favor. He can perform the ceremony this evening. Hank let out a harsh laugh. Mighty eager, ain't you, Nathaniel? Blake's expression hardened as he looked at Hank. Collins isn't a man who accepts defeat easily. The sooner Miss Taylor is legally under my protection, the safer she'll be. Virginia recognized the wisdom in his words. Collins was known for his vindictive nature. All right, she said finally. I'll marry you today. 2 hours later, Virginia found herself standing before Judge Wilson in his cluttered office in town. She wore the same blue dress, having had no time to change or prepare. Blake had provided a simple gold band that gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the dusty windows. Judge Wilson, a portly man with kind eyes, performed the ceremony with surprising solemnity given the hasty circumstances. Virginia's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her vows, the enormity of what she was doing washing over her in waves. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Wilson declared, closing his Bible. You may kiss the bride. Virginia tensed, suddenly realizing this part of the ceremony hadn't been discussed. Blake seemed to sense her discomfort and simply leaned forward to place a chaste kiss on her cheek. Thank you, Judge, Blake said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish. Virginia added her signature with a shaking hand. Just like that, she was Virginia Nathaniel, married to a man she'd known for less than a day. As they stepped outside into the gathering dusk, Blake offered her his arm. Mrs. Nathaniel, my wagon is this way. The title sounded foreign to her ears. Where are we going? Home, Blake replied. It's about an hour's ride to my ranch. I hope you don't mind traveling in the dark. Virginia glanced nervously up and down the street, half expecting to see Collins lurking in the shadows. I don't mind. Blake helped her into the wagon, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they pulled away from town, Virginia watched the buildings grow smaller, wondering if she'd made the right choice or merely traded one form of captivity for another. The journey passed in relative silence, broken only by Blake occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief information about the area. Virginia appreciated that he didn't press her for conversation, allowing her time to process the drastic changes to her life. When they crested a small hill, Blake pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, he said, gesturing ahead. Double Circle Ranch. In the moonlight, Virginia could make out a large, well-built ranch house surrounded by several outbuildings. A corral held horses that nickered softly as the wagon approached. Unlike her brother's dilapidated cabin, everything about Blake's property spoke of care and prosperity. It's impressive, she admitted. Blake smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Been building it up for 7 years now. Started with nothing but determination and a few head of cattle. As they pulled up to the house, the front door opened, and an older woman stepped onto the porch, a lantern in her hand. That's Mrs. Abernathy, Blake explained. She's my housekeeper. Lives in town but stays here when I'm away. The woman's eyebrows shot up when she saw Virginia. Mr. Nathaniel, you didn't mention you were bringing company. Blake helped Virginia down from the wagon. Mrs. Abernathy, I'd like you to meet Virginia Virginia Nathaniel. My wife. The housekeeper's mouth fell open in astonishment. Your wife? When did this happen? Today, Blake replied simply. It's been a long day for Mrs. Nathaniel. Could you show her to the main bedroom and help her get settled? Mrs. Abernathy recovered quickly, her professional demeanor returning. Of course. Come with me, Mrs. Nathaniel. Virginia followed the housekeeper into the house, marveling at the comfortable furnishings. The main bedroom was spacious, with a large four-poster bed, a dresser, and a washstand with a porcelain basin. This is your room? Virginia asked, running her fingers over the handcrafted quilt on the bed. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. Mr. Nathaniel's room, yes. Though I'll make up the guest room for him tonight. Virginia turned in surprise. He's not staying here. I assumed. Mrs. Abernathy trailed off, then smiled kindly. I'll let you two work out those arrangements. There's fresh water in the pitcher for washing up, and I'll bring you a nightgown. After the housekeeper left, Virginia sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Blake had kept his word about giving her space, but she couldn't help wondering about his true motives. Men didn't rescue women from terrible situations without expecting something in return, at least none she'd ever known. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Virginia? May I come in? Blake called. Yes, she answered, rising to her feet. Blake entered, carrying her small bag from the cabin. I had one of my ranch hands retrieve this from your brother's place. I thought you might want your belongings. Virginia accepted the bag gratefully. Thank you. That was thoughtful. Blake lingered by the door, his hat in his hands. Mrs. Abernathy is preparing the guest room for me. I want you to know I meant what I said earlier. This marriage is for your protection, nothing more. Virginia studied him, trying to reconcile his actions with her deep-seated distrust. Why did you really do this, Mr. Nathaniel? The truth this time. Blake sighed, leaning against the doorframe. My sister, he said after a moment. She was in a situation similar to yours. Our father died, leaving her in the care of our uncle. Blake's jaw tightened. He sold her to pay a debt. To a man like Collins. I was away, working cattle drives in Texas. By the time I returned, it was too late. Virginia's heart constricted. What happened to her? She didn't survive the winter, Blake said simply, though his eyes reflected an old grief. Her husband was cruel. She tried to escape, got caught in a blizzard. He met Virginia's gaze directly. When I heard about your brother's plan in town today, I couldn't stand by and let history repeat itself. His candor touched something in Virginia. I'm sorry about your sister. Blake nodded, accepting her sympathy. Get some rest, Virginia. Tomorrow we can discuss how this arrangement will work going forward. As he turned to leave, Virginia called after him. Mr. Nathaniel? He paused in the doorway. Blake, please. Blake, she amended. Thank you. Not just for the rescue, but for being honest with me. A small smile touched his lips. Good night, Virginia. The next morning, Virginia woke to sunlight streaming through curtains finer than any she'd seen before. For a moment, she was disoriented, the events of the previous day seeming like a dream. Then reality came rushing back. She was married to Blake Nathaniel, a man who had essentially purchased her from her brother, albeit with nobler intentions than Jasper Collins. She dressed quickly in one of her simple dresses, eager to explore her new surroundings in daylight. When she emerged from the bedroom, delicious smells led her to the kitchen, where Mrs. Abernathy was cooking breakfast. Good morning, Mrs. Nathaniel. The housekeeper greeted warmly. I trust you slept well. Yes, thank you, Virginia replied, still uncomfortable with her new title. And please, call me Virginia. Mrs. Abernathy smiled. Very well, Virginia. Mr. Nathaniel is out checking the cattle, but he should return shortly for breakfast. Virginia hesitated, then asked, Is there anything I can help with? I'm used to doing the cooking and cleaning. Not today, Mrs. Abernathy said firmly. Today you get acquainted with your new home. Tomorrow's soon enough to take on household duties. Virginia spent the morning exploring the ranch house, impressed by its size and comfort. Blake had clearly prospered as a rancher. There were 3 bedrooms, a study filled with books that made her heart leap with excitement, a formal dining room, and a comfortable sitting area with a stone fireplace. Everything was well made, but not ostentatious. She was examining a bookshelf when Blake returned, his boots clomping on the wooden floor. He stopped short when he saw her, as if surprised to find her in his home, then smiled. Good morning, he said, removing his hat. I see you're inspecting the library. Virginia nodded, returning a book to its shelf. I've never seen so many books outside of a schoolhouse. They were my mother's, Blake explained. Reading was her passion. Feel free to borrow any that interest you. Thank you, Virginia said sincerely. Access to books was a luxury she hadn't expected. They ate breakfast together, the conversation slightly awkward but not unpleasant. Blake explained the workings of the ranch, the cattle operations, the small staff of ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse nearby, the vegetable garden that supplied much of their food. I was thinking, Blake said as they finished their meal, you might want to ride into town tomorrow. Get some new dresses and whatever else you need. Virginia looked down at her worn blue dress, conscious of how shabby it must appear in these surroundings. That's not necessary. I don't need charity. Blake's expression grew serious. It's not charity, Virginia. You're my wife now, at least on paper. It wouldn't look right for you to go without proper clothing and necessities. Virginia bristled slightly at the implication that her appearance might embarrass him. And appearances are important. In this case, yes, Blake replied evenly. The better established you are as my wife, the less likely Collins or your brother will cause trouble. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I can't afford it. Consider it part of our arrangement. Put that way, Virginia found it difficult to argue. All right, thank you. The next few days fell into a pattern. Virginia spent her mornings learning the household routine from Mrs. Abernathy, her afternoons reading or walking the property, and her evenings in polite conversation with Blake before they retired to separate bedrooms. Their trip to town had yielded several new dresses, a pair of sturdy boots, and various toiletries that made Virginia feel almost pampered. Blake had been generous but not overbearing, allowing her to make her own selections while insisting on quality. It was during this outing that Virginia first noticed the way people looked at them with curiosity and, from the women, with something like envy. Blake Nathaniel, she discovered, was considered quite a catch in Silver Creek. His unexpected marriage had caused quite a stir. Mrs. Nathaniel, called a woman's voice as they exited the general store. Virginia turned to see the minister's wife approaching with a broad smile. I'm Beatrice Edwards. I was so disappointed to miss your wedding. You must join us for Sunday service this week. Virginia glanced at Blake, who nodded encouragingly. We'd be delighted, Mrs. Edwards, she replied, falling easily into the role of devoted wife. As they drove back to the ranch, Virginia couldn't help but reflect on how different her life had become in just a few days. Your reputation in town seems quite favorable, she observed. Blake chuckled. People respect hard work and success. When I came here 7 years ago, I had nothing but determination and the knowledge I'd gained working other men's ranches. Nobody expected me to last the winter. But you proved them wrong, Virginia said, impressed despite herself. I'm stubborn that way, Blake replied with a smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and more carefree. Virginia found herself smiling back, drawn to this glimpse of the man beneath the serious rancher exterior. A week into their unusual marriage, Virginia was folding laundry when she heard raised voices outside. She moved to the window and saw Blake confronting a familiar figure, Jasper Collins, flanked by two rough-looking men. Virginia's stomach clenched with fear. She hurried to the front door, arriving just in time to hear Collins's threatening words. You humiliated me, Nathaniel. Stole what was rightfully mine. Blake stood his ground, one hand resting casually near his holster. A woman isn't property, Collins. You'd do well to remember that. Collins spat on the ground. That whore's brother promised her to me. A deal's a deal. Virginia stepped onto the porch, anger overriding her fear. I suggest you leave our property, Mr. Collins. All four men turned toward her. Blake's expression shifted from surprise to concern, while Collins leered unpleasantly. Well, if it isn't the bride herself, Collins sneered. Tell me, sweetheart, did Nathaniel get his money's worth yet? Blake moved with unexpected speed, his fist connecting with Collins's jaw before the older man could react. Collins stumbled backward, blood trickling from his split lip. That's my wife you're speaking to, Blake said, his voice dangerously quiet. Disrespect her again, and you won't walk away. Collins wiped the blood from his mouth, his eyes narrowed with hatred. This isn't over, Nathaniel. Not by a long shot. He turned to his companions. Let's go, boys. We'll settle this another time. As they rode away, Blake turned to Virginia, his expression softening with concern. Are you all right? Virginia nodded, though her heart was still racing. I'm fine. What about you? Blake flexed his hand, wincing slightly. Nothing damaged except my temper. He guided her back inside, his hand gentle on her elbow. Collins is all talk. He won't try anything direct, he's too much of a coward for that. But he'll try something indirect? Virginia asked, her concern growing. Blake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Possibly. I've doubled the night watch on the cattle. And I think it's best if you don't go into town alone for a while. Virginia bristled at the restriction, but recognized its necessity. He really believes he had some claim on me. Men like Collins believe they're entitled to whatever they want, Blake said grimly. But I won't let him near you. I promise. The conviction in his voice was reassuring, but it stirred something else in Virginia to a warmth that had been growing steadily over the past week. Blake had been nothing but respectful, keeping his promise to give her space while still treating her with consideration that went beyond their agreement. That night at dinner, Virginia found herself studying Blake across the table, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. He was handsome, certainly, but it was his character that increasingly drew her attention, his fairness with his workers, his gentleness with animals, his respect for her opinions. You're staring, Blake observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. Virginia blushed, embarrassed at being caught. I was just thinking. About. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. About how different you are from what I expected. Blake set down his fork, giving her his full attention. What did you expect? I'm not sure, Virginia admitted. Someone more demanding, perhaps. Someone who would see me as a possession, not a person. Blake's expression grew serious. I meant what I said when we made our arrangement, Virginia. I have no expectations beyond what you're willing to give. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the atmosphere between them, a tension that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had been there all along, unacknowledged. The moment was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Blake frowned, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun he'd set aside for dinner. Stay here, he said, rising from his chair. Virginia ignored the instruction, following a few steps behind as Blake opened the door to reveal one of his ranch hands, breathing hard as if he'd been running. Mr. Nathaniel. Sir, there's a fire in the south pasture. Looks deliberate. Blake cursed under his breath. Get the men. Bring buckets and shovels. He turned to Virginia. I have to go. Bar the door behind me. Before she could respond, he grabbed his gun belt and hat, then hesitated. With a sudden movement, he strode back to her, cupped her face in his hands, and pressed a firm kiss to her forehead. "Stay safe," he murmured, then was gone. Virginia stood frozen for a moment, her skin tingling where his lips had touched. Then practicality took over. She barred the door as instructed, gathered lamps and water, and watched from the window as Blake and his men rode toward an ominous orange glow on the horizon. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Virginia paced the house, unable to settle. When she finally heard horses approaching near midnight, she rushed to the window, relief flooding through her at the sight of Blake dismounting, weary but whole. She unbarred the door and opened it before he reached the porch. "Are you all right?" "The fire, we contained it," Blake said, his voice rough with smoke and exhaustion. "Lost some grazing land, but no cattle or buildings." In the lamplight, Virginia could see soot streaking his face and arms. Without thinking, she took his hand and led him to the kitchen, where she poured water into a basin and gently began washing the grime from his hands and face. Blake watched her, his expression unreadable. "Collins's men set the fire," he said quietly. "One of my hands saw them riding away." Virginia's hand stilled. "This is because of me." Blake caught her wrist gently. "No, this is because Collins is a vindictive bastard who can't stand losing. Don't blame yourself for his actions." Their faces were close, Blake's blue eyes reflecting the lamplight. Virginia suddenly became acutely aware of his hand still holding her wrist, his thumb absently stroking the sensitive skin there. "I was worried about you," she admitted softly. Something in Blake's expression changed, softened. "Were you?" Virginia nodded, unable to look away from his face. "I've grown accustomed to having you around." A smile tugged at the corner of Blake's mouth. "Accustomed? Perhaps more than accustomed," Virginia conceded, her heart racing. Blake released her wrist to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather-light. "Virginia, I know we agreed this was a business arrangement, but I find myself wanting more." The confession hung between them, fraught with possibility. Virginia searched his face, finding only sincerity and something that looked remarkably like tenderness. "I think," she said carefully, "I might want more too." Blake's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle, questioning kiss that Virginia found herself returning with unexpected eagerness. When they parted, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he murmured. "When I married you to keep you safe, I didn't anticipate falling in love with you." The word love sent a shock through Virginia's system. "Love," she echoed. Blake drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "Too soon to say that." Virginia considered the question seriously. Was it too soon? She barely knew this man, and yet in the short time they'd been together, he'd shown her more kindness and respect than she'd known in years. What had started as gratitude had evolved into admiration, attraction, and perhaps something deeper. "No," she decided finally. "Not too soon. Just unexpected." Blake's smile returned, transforming his tired face. "Good. Because I do love you, Virginia Nathaniel. And I'd like to start courting my wife properly, if she'll allow it." Virginia laughed softly at the absurdity of the situation. "I believe that would be acceptable, Mr. Nathaniel." The next morning, Virginia woke to find a single wildflower placed on the pillow beside her, a touch so simple yet so thoughtful that it brought tears to her eyes. When she emerged from her bedroom, their bedroom now, though they had agreed to take things slowly, Blake was waiting with coffee and a shy smile that made her heart flutter. The weeks that followed were a kind of courtship unlike any Virginia could have imagined. Blake brought her small gifts, books, a silver hairpin, fresh berries he'd picked himself. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. He taught her to ride properly, laughing with delight when she mastered controlling her horse with just her knees. And each night, their goodnight kisses grew longer, more passionate, until finally, 6 weeks after their unconventional wedding, Virginia invited Blake to stay. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice husky with desire but his eyes serious. Virginia had never been more certain of anything. "I love you, Blake Nathaniel," she whispered against his lips. "I want to be your wife in every way." That night, their marriage truly began, no longer a business arrangement, but a union of hearts freely given. A month later, news reached them that Jasper Collins had been arrested for attempting to rob the Silver Creek Bank. He would spend the next 10 years in territorial prison, removing his shadow from their lives. As for Hank Taylor, Virginia's brother eventually drank through Blake's whiskey and money, then drifted west toward California. Virginia sometimes wondered what became of him, but found the pain of his betrayal fading with each passing day. 1 year to the day after their hasty wedding, Blake and Virginia renewed their vows in the Silver Creek Church, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had come to respect their partnership. This time, when Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Blake's kiss was neither chaste nor brief, drawing cheers and good-natured laughter from the assembled guests. At the reception held at the Double Circle Ranch, Blake pulled Virginia aside, leading her to the oak tree that shaded their garden. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small velvet box. Inside lay a gold ring set with a perfect blue sapphire, a proper engagement ring to go with your wedding band. "I should have given you one from the beginning." Virginia smiled as he slipped it onto her finger alongside the simple gold band she'd worn for a year. "Our beginning was unconventional, but I wouldn't change it. Every step led us here." Blake gathered her into his arms, his expression serious. "When I offered your brother 4 bottles of whiskey and $20, it was the best investment I ever made." Virginia laughed softly. "Is that what I'm worth to you, Mr. Nathaniel?" "For bottles of whiskey?" Blake shook his head, his eyes full of love. "You're worth everything, Mrs. Nathaniel. Everything and more." 2 years later, as Virginia rocked their infant daughter in the nursery Blake had built with his own hands, she reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this life. What had begun as a desperate transaction, her brother selling her for whiskey, a stranger paying double to save her, had transformed into the deepest love she could have imagined. Outside, Blake was teaching their 3-year-old son to ride his first pony, his patient voice carrying through the open window. Virginia smiled, watching them. The Double Circle Ranch had prospered under their joint care, growing into one of the most successful operations in the territory. More importantly, it had become a true home, a place of love, respect, and partnership. "Your father is a good man," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "One day I'll tell you our story, how sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures." As if hearing her thoughts, Blake looked up at the window and smiled, raising his hand in greeting. Virginia returned the gesture, her heart full. Her brother had sold her for whiskey, but a cowboy had paid twice the price and married her that day, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift of all, a love worth far more than any price that could be named.